wow, it's not a mistake that I didn't have access to these things when I was growing up in Detroit. It was actually done intentionally. It was more of a systemic issue. And so I ended up going to college to study environmental policy, was very interested in that. But I remember one of my like very first, if not my first, yeah, maybe like one of my first or second internships, I was learning about the intersection between environmental policy and health equity, but mainly like how air pollution basically triggers asthma for a lot of kids, especially Black and brown kids. Like I think like we're like Black and brown kids are like 2.3 times more likely to be sent to the ER for asthma attacks because we live near factories or incinerators and stuff. And so for me, it was very triggering and eye opening. Like myself, I don't have asthma, but a lot of kids, all the kids I grew up with, either had asthma or you knew someone else who did. So it was like, wow, this was something that was systemic and something that was related to health inequities and environmental justice. So I just remember being so starstruck by it.
Hey, Style Crew. We are back for another episode of our election series. And this one, I am incredibly excited to have you all learn more from our guests. I have the special guest, Miss Diamond Spratling, here today. We are talking about all things environmental policies, climate change, and all of the things that have taken place during the Biden administration, what we need to look forward to coming up, and just have a deep dive into that. So I'm going to start it off by reading her bio. So Diamond Spratling stands as an acclaimed environmental health and justice activist, founder, author, and dynamic global public speaker. In 2019, she founded Girl Plus Environment, the national nonprofit dedicated to educating, engaging, and empowering Black and brown women and non-binary individuals, inspiring them to champion climate and environmental justice within their communities. Diamond's leadership is deeply rooted in her personal experiences growing up in Detroit, propelling her mission to dismantle health, racial, and environmental inequities in communities of color. Hailing from Detroit, this two-time TEDx speaker brings over a decade of expertise at the intersection of environment and health. Diamond's unwavering commitment to this sector has garnered her prestigious recognitions, including the William H. Sterner Memorial Award in 2017, the Elmer Manufacturing Award in 2018, the Yale New Horizons in Conservation Award in 2021 and 2022, Young Nonprofit Professionals 30 Under 30 in 2022, and the 40 Under 40 Gifted and Young Gifted and Green in 2023. Beyond her impactful work at Girl Plus Environment, Diamond has left an indelible mark globally, assisting local governments, global brands, and organizations in adopting meaningful, equitable processes that prioritize the health of our communities and safeguard our planet. Notable contributions include support for projects at Bloomberg Associates, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, City of Atlanta, SoCal Gas, Climate Advocacy Lab, GreenLink Analytics, and the International Society for Urban Health. Diamond's leadership prowess recently led her to appointment to the City of Atlanta Clean Energy Advisory Board, earning her the title of 2024 Toms of Maine Incubator Awardee and NRDC E2 One Hotels Fellow. Additionally, she was recognized as a 2024 Future Leader Climate Fellow by the Aspen Institute. A sought-after global speaker, Diamond has given talks for Hasbro, Columbia University, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, Detroit Mayor's Council on Equity, Families, USA Health Action Conference, World Resource Institute, University of Michigan, and MIT. Her impactful presence has been featured in Essence Magazine Incorporated, Madison 365, Canvas Rebel Magazine, One Hotels, and other esteemed publications. Diamond Spratling's journey and achievements underscore her unwavering commitment to advancing environmental justice and fostering positive change on a global scale. Well, welcome to Style and Conversation podcast. And as you all just heard, she has a long resume, as the kids would say. So we are very lucky to have you here to talk about these topics. So I just want to welcome you in.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for our conversation and yeah, just appreciate the invitation.
And, we met a few months ago at a Sassy Girls event. We both were fortunate enough to be able to speak on the panel. And I hadn't even launched the podcast yet. It actually launched a couple months after that. But as soon as I heard your level of expertise, I was like, I have to talk to you about this. Like, I know I want to do this series. And here we are several months later. That was in March and we're in October. So
Yeah.
I'm just excited to speak with you about this.
Same.
I'm so impressed with your work.
Thank you.
I want to start out. No, I really am. And I'm excited to get into all things environmental and all the tea and just have you educate us. Because to be honest, it is something that I'm passionate about. However, my knowledge has been limited to, I understand the importance of recycling and emissions and focusing on sustainability when it comes to clothing. But I think this is an opportunity for all of us to be more educated and keep these things in mind. Also, in terms of how it affects our health, our equity as Black and Brown people. So I'm ready to jump in and allow you to tell everyone about your journey to this particular field. I know in your bio, it talks about you being from Detroit and that having an impact. So tell us all about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't really grow up saying that I wanted to be an environmental activist. I mean, I don't think most activists think that we need to spend our entire lives advocating for something that feels like it should be human rights.
Right.
But like I mentioned, I grew up in Detroit, and I mean, naturally, I was one of those kids who I love to be outside, outdoors all day and night with friends. I love science and all those, I guess, like traditional kind of like sciencey things. And it wasn't until my dad actually started making more money that we were able to move to a suburb outside of Detroit. It was only a couple of miles away, but my entire environment and kind of experience was kind of different. Like I had to go to a new school. I had access to more things that I didn't have access to before. And so I was a kid and it was a little bit concerning to me. I didn't really process it and know that it had to do anything with like racial justice or like access in food insecurity or just environmental issues. I was just like, wow, like I have access to all of these things now all of a sudden. But as I started taking more environmental classes in high school and stuff, I kind of learned about this concept of environmental justice, and that kind of like was a light bulb for me to really understand like, wow, it's not a mistake that I didn't have access to these things when I was growing up in Detroit. It was actually done intentionally. You know, it was more of a systemic issue. And so I ended up going to college to study environmental policy, was very interested in that. But I remember one of my like very first, if not my first, yeah, maybe like one of my first or second internships, I was learning about the intersection between environmental policy and health equity, but mainly like how air pollution basically triggers asthma for a lot of kids, especially Black and Brown kids. Like I think like we're like Black and Brown kids are like 2.3 times more likely to be sent to the ER for asthma attacks because we live near factories or incinerators and stuff. And so for me, it was like, it was very triggering and eye opening. Like myself, I don't have asthma, but a lot of kids, all the kids I grew up with, either had asthma or you knew someone else who did. So it was like, wow, this was something that was systemic and something that was related to health inequities and environmental justice. So I just remember being so starstruck by it. So back then I like went on to Facebook. I think I made a post. I was like, you guys should be mad about this. Like, does everyone know what, air pollution is, and like the relation it has to asthma and kids being sent to the ER and all these things, and the fact that half of us don't even have health insurance. And I got nothing. Like, no one was like really interacting with my posts and stuff. And back then, of course, like I was a little bit frustrated, because I'm like, you guys can chime in on everything else when I'm talking about shoes and all that. But it was just more so, yeah, it was just like people didn't really understand. And I think the way that I was communicating it, it was not in a way that was easily translated to people in my community. So from then, I ended up moving to Atlanta because I got into grad school at Emory to study public health, because I was like, okay, I want to learn more about this health lens and really how the environment is impacting our health as Black and Brown people. So that's really where my passion lies. And so from that, I ended up starting my nonprofit, Girl Plus Environment, because I wanted to see more people who looked like me in the sector. Because when I was in undergrad, when I was in all these internships and stuff, I was the only one. So the solutions by default were not reflective of the experiences that were happening in Black and Brown communities. They don't know what type of solutions to implement because none of us were in the rooms. So I essentially wanted to kind of create a space that I wish I always had when I was growing up and first getting into the sector, because we know when we're in those rooms, when we have that power to be decision makers, then the solutions are more equitable, they're more favorable, and support the needs that we actually have within our communities. So Girl Plus Environment essentially kind of like bloomed from all of that in my experiences, kind of wanting to get into the sector.
I am so intrigued with how you even got to this point. One, you just educated me on something I didn't even realize, the parallel to childhood asthma to the environment that you reside. So that's one. Thank you for that. Number two, that does make me very angry. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And I appreciate that you took a step back and realized, okay, I made this post. I was expecting to receive like this type of reaction, and I didn't get not just a reaction, I didn't even get a response. So you took a minute to reflect and say, okay, maybe the way I'm communicating this isn't it's not landing. And I think that's so important for a lot of us in communication just across the board, to understand the audience that you're speaking to and communicate in such a way that they can feel the impact. And from what I'm seeing, it seems that you've been able to do that. And to take it a step further, once you started pursuing your studies in public health, just realizing that there weren't many people that look like you. So I want to ask, do you feel that that is changing, that we're seeing more people that look like us in these spaces, or do we still have a long way to go in terms of that and having equity when these decisions are being made?
Yeah, I would say yes and no, right? I mean, I think that we've definitely made significant progress from since when I first got into this sector 10 years ago.
Mhm.
I was the only one. There was, yeah, in my year, I was the only Black woman studying environmental policy at my university. And so that was something that was it was triggering. But now I'm seeing so many Black and Brown girls who are like, oh yeah, I'm studying environmental policy and all these things. Like, I just had someone DM me yesterday. They're like, I'm interested in environmental issues, I'd love to talk to you. And so it's really like eye-opening to see that there has been advancements, because I didn't have anyone to go to who looked like me, where I could talk to and like have a mentor in this space. But now I feel like there are so many like young women of color who are studying these issues, starting their own organizations. I mean, there's an entire organization called Black Girl Environmentalists. And so that's very exciting to see. But at the same time, there is still very much tons of work to do, specifically around the community engagement piece and making sure that community members in marginalized communities are a part of the policy side of things. And even knowledgeable about the environmental issues that are occurring, and I think a lot of that we can blame on scientists not really knowing how to communicate and how to talk to community members about environmental issues. I mean, for so many years, Black communities have been pushed out and told, like, oh, we don't care about the environment, which
Mhm.
that's not true at all. My
Right.
grandmother was a conservationist by just saving her plastic bags when she went to the grocery store,
Girl, everybody's
So,
grandma.
yes, exactly. It's like this is not
Yes.
new to us at all, but they've kind of taken the terminology and made it so technical in a way to make us feel like we don't know what these issues are. We don't know anything about energy savings when in fact we know all about it. We were the ones who started it. So, yeah.
Listen, I still practice a lot of the things that my mom put in place that were passed down from my grandma. Like when I'm going out of town, I just completely turn the air off. I did this recently when I went on an international trip, and one of my girlfriends came over to stay the night before because we had an early flight. And I asked her, I was like, you locked your doors, did you turn your air off and unplug everything? She was like, no, I didn't. What does that do? And I was like, well, it reduces your power bill. And two, it just reduces the amount of energy being used because we're not going to be here for the next 4 or 5 days. So, little things like that, not little things, but just things like that have been put in place, that have been passed down. Even thinking about, I know both of my grandparents, I hear my parents say this all the time, they ate off the land. And, they were very proud to do. They didn't waste anything that they grew, that they, even if they cut off the butt of a tomato, it was going into something. If it was like some pepper sauce for green, like whatever the case may be. So I'm glad that you bring that up, that a lot of times within our community, we're already practicing these things. And I didn't even realize it until you brought it up, but it's just not being communicated in a way for us to understand and expand on.
Exactly. That's totally true. And I think, it's funny because I'll be having a random conversation with someone. They'll be like, oh, yeah, well, I don't really care about the environment, or like, that's not really my thing. Like, a lot of people say that. And like, I'm not offended at all. But I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions. Do you care about like how much you're paying for your energy bill? Do you care about, like when you leave the house, I'm pretty sure you turn the lights off because our parents told us that we need to be doing that as soon as we leave the room, cutting the lights off, all those things. Like, you care about like your health and your safety, all of those things are translated into environmental issues, but I just don't think that we do a good job at clicking and understanding that, like, oh, I do actually care about the environment. I turn my lights off when I'm not in the room, or I turn the heat down or open the windows or whatever the case may be. It's just goes back to the communication side of things.
Hey, Style Crew. I want to talk to you about the sponsor of the first season of the Style and Conversation podcast, which is Bite Authority. I am holding their multi-collagen protein, which is the very first product that introduced me to their brand as a whole. So I came across their multi-collagen protein after doing about a month of research to find the right collagen for me and my lifestyle. And I was looking for a collagen from a reputable company that had customer service that was available, that provided the daily recommended dosage of collagen, didn't include any sugar. They had a variety of flavors that appealed to me, or non-flavor in case I wanted to include it in my coffee or a smoothie one morning. And that's how I came across Bite Authority. I gave it a shot 1 month, and after that I was hooked. I became a recurring customer, and now 2 years later, they are a sponsor of our first season. So, because of that, we have a special code for the listeners of Style and Conversation, which is Styled by Jess. That code is spelled STYLEDBYJESS, and that will get you 15% off their entire collection of products. In addition to their collagen, they have a variety of products for your lifestyle, whatever your needs may be. They have several supplements and tablets. So one of the tablets that I consume a couple of times per week is the Melt PM. And This actually aids in sleep support, appetite control, metabolism boost, and helps to reduce cravings, to help with all of the things that aid with maintaining a healthy weight for us ladies. And so this is another product of theirs that I really love. And they have, like I said, a variety of products for whatever you're looking for. So just to tell you a little bit more about Bite Authority, at Bite Authority, we believe everyone should be able to take their health into their own hands, and we envision a future where health and nutrition products are found on counters in every single household. We pride ourselves on being an absolute authority when it comes to health and wellness supplements, and set the standard on providing high quality, science-based, clean, tested, and proven products for every person from every walk of life. Bite Authority can now be found at GNC retail stores as well as other retailers nationwide, and has gone international in Canada, the Dominican Republic, Panama, the Caribbean, and Africa. For more information about Bite Authority and our commitment to promoting women's health, wellness, and active lifestyles, please visit www.biteauthority.com. And that is spelled BITAUTHORITY. All right, make sure you use the code Styled by Jess, and then let's jump back into this episode. Yeah, so like we were saying, I agree with you. It's already small things that we're doing, but add up and make a big difference. And so, with that said, I want to ask you, so obviously, we're here to discuss environmental policies, as well as the government's connection to them and the ties to the upcoming election, what our listeners should consider as they cast their ballots in November. So, can you educate us on the Environmental Protection Agency and what its role is?
Yeah, of course. So the EPA, super standard federal level of government, basically was ultimately created to instill environmental policies and regulations. So to make sure that different companies, organizations, all type of entities all across the US are basically abiding by the environmental policies that they've created. Some policies are passed, and unfortunately, some aren't. And I think it ultimately depends. Some of the policies aren't always, I would say, as strict as we would like them. There are many ways that a lot of companies kind of just like get around different policies, unfortunately. But the strength of the EPA really kind of depends on who we have in government, specifically who we have like as president. So, for example, when we had Trump elected, there wasn't. It was pretty quiet at the EPA, to be honest. There weren't a lot of things that were able to get pushed or regulated because of his stance on a lot of environmental policies. A lot of the EPA's funding got taken away. For example, we didn't have an environmental justice department when Trump was in office. That was something that had gotten rid of. But now that we have Biden in office currently, they were able to bring back the a lot of the EPA departments, particularly the Environmental Justice Department, which is very exciting and most relevant probably for our communities. So again, it really just depends on who we have in office and really what their values are related to different environmental issues.
I'm glad you brought up the last portion of your response in terms of the president holding that office and what their values are in terms of environmental policies, climate change, all of these things. Because the next question that I wanted to ask you is, for years, scientists have been giving us various warnings around environmental change, increase, global warming, and there has been increased pushback from one particular side of this argument. And so I'm curious as to, with you working in this sector, what have you found to be the reasonings behind this logic?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that there's just one, reason or one thing, but
Mhm.
from my thoughts, I think that, well, I have a few different thoughts. So the
Yeah.
first is that I think that overall scientists haven't done a great job at communicating, and I've said that before, and I'll probably say it many more times during this
Yeah, teach
podcast.
us,
And
girl.
again, I'm also a scientist in part as well, but we don't know how to communicate. We've told people that the sky is falling, or that we were very doom and gloom, and that we have to save the polar bears, and all these things were happening. We had our like Al Gore days, which I love Al Gore, but
Mhm.
the way that we talk about environmental issues have changed. And so I think a lot of people are still holding on to the fact that, well, climate scientists told us we wouldn't have made it to 2020, but we're still here. And so a lot of people are a bit confused. But so I think that there's fault from a scientist standpoint in how we have in the past communicated these issues. We've been very doom and gloom as opposed to optimistic, and opposed to solutions based, which is what we've kind of turned into now. But the other thing is, I think it's very hard for some people to see a world that is both environmental and climate friendly, but also a world where people can thrive economically. But as we've seen in the recent years, that's just not true. There are tons of opportunities within the clean and green energy economy where people can make money but also
Mhm.
not hurt or harm the environment. It's not that two things can't coexist, but people who are very stuck in the coal phase, there are many coal mining communities, and those are just communities where a lot of the people in the community, like, they work as coal miners, and so that's how they've been getting their money the past several years. Same as within the city of Detroit, we're known as being the automotive industry, and so automotive, that was huge for the city of Detroit. So economically, they're like, what do you mean these electric vehicles, or that cars are bad, all of those things, because that's how they've made their money. All of my parents, my everyone on my dad's side of family, they were all automotive workers at like Chrysler and Ford, and so they're pro cars and gasoline and all those things. But
Mhm.
now we're finally shifting to be able to do electric cars, for example, and so it doesn't mean that people are going to lose their jobs. It just means that there are more opportunities for people because you can build your skills up to get into the electric sector as well. So I think that when it comes to a lot of people having, like, I guess, controversial thoughts around climate, a lot of it comes from misinformation, and I think that's really the core of the issue in a lot of instances.
So I'm really glad that we are exploring this portion of the conversation because you've given me something to reflect back on in this moment. And what that is for me, listen, I'm not Bill Nye, the science girl.
Me neither.
Like, I know the basics, okay? But I always have enjoyed science. What tripped me up was the math portion of it. So that's why I
Same.
never like excelled
Yep.
beyond a career, anything of that nature. But I do enjoy science. I trust scientists. I trust when they have been telling us that
Mhm.
the world is getting hotter.
Mhm.
I'm from Alabama, so I can attest to the world getting hotter. It's probably 100 degrees there right now. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but
Yep.
the point is, I believed it because I'm seeing this. I'm also from the Gulf Coast.
Mhm.
So I'm seeing these storms get stronger and stronger, which is one of the reasons that I ended up moving from New Orleans to
Mhm.
Atlanta because the last storm that hit Ida ended up being a category 4 by the time it hit.
Mhm.
And I've lived firsthand what is happening with climate change. I'll say that.
Yeah.
So for me, I never had a problem believing what was being told to me. But hearing you break it down from that aspect of growing up in a coal mining community and knowing that, okay, this is going to be my career trajectory, and the
Mhm.
way the automotive industry really positively benefited Detroit, like known as the Motor City, right? So I can now resonate with how this information can be hard for people to receive. And what I'm hearing from you is, number one, like you said, it's misinformation, not the best communication, but also fear around it. Like when you talked about these communities where these are their careers, not understanding that, hey, there's an opportunity when done correctly for you to still have a viable career, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I don't want to misspeak, but potentially earn more income because you have an additional skill set. And so that's what I'm hearing. So I'm glad that you expressed it that way, because it definitely helped me have more empathy on this topic and understand, not for everybody, because some people
Right.
you're giving rah just because you're not affected.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
in a situation like the two examples that you gave, I can take a step back and understand the pushback.
Yeah.
We still need y'all to get on board. Don't get it twisted, but I can understand
Absolutely.
the pushback.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, so with that being said, I want to jump into let's talk about some of the policies and executive orders that have been put in place under Biden's administration. So the Inflation Reduction Act was signed by President Biden in 2022. Can you help us understand the significance of this act?
Yeah, absolutely. So the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, it was huge. It was huge for us. I can't believe we are 2 years in already. And the significance is really that is the largest climate policy that has ever been passed. So that's a win within itself, but it's also the largest climate investment ever. There were, I think, over $350 billion within that plan, within that policy. So that's very exciting. But what I find most significant is that, it's often seen as a climate policy, but really I would argue that it's an economic policy. It's a policy toward a just and equitable clean energy economy for the United States. In the past, we've been very far behind as far as advancing and being innovative, but really that plan is significant in making sure that the US does not fall behind and is not reliant on other countries to get our energy. And so that's really big and really helps to bring in jobs. There's been millions of jobs that have been created just in the past 2 years through the Inflation Reduction Act. And then within the state of Georgia alone, there is over 300 projects that are being implemented right now. And I know that people have, thoughts about Governor Kemp. Obviously, he hasn't always been the biggest advocate for climate issues, but he has pushed so many of these projects, and that's because of the economic benefits that the Inflation Reduction Act has brought to the state of Georgia. So he has been doing project after project. There's been so many different contractors, Black owned businesses that are basically helping with clean energy. It's so huge, especially from an economic standpoint of providing jobs, but also just providing opportunities for local contractors to get a piece of the pie. And a great example of this is actually at Girl Plus Environment. We just recently launched our entire Black women businesses in green economy fellowship, where we gave stipends to 5 Black women-owned businesses here in Atlanta to help them figure out how can they be a part of the green economy. How can I take advantage of this opportunity? How do I not get left behind during this transition? Like many people got left behind in 2008 with the housing crash. People got left behind during COVID when they didn't have the resources to take advantage of the economic opportunities. And so the Inflation Reduction Act, honestly has been amazing, and it would be terrifying in my opinion, if that was something that was stripped away from us in 2025.
I think you explained everything so well, and I'm glad that you tied in the economic piece to that in terms of the creation of jobs, because again, that has been, like we just talked about, a fear of many on the other, one of the fears as far as from many on the other side of this argument, in terms of being and not progressive in terms of wanting things to move forward as far as pushing these policies. So I'm really glad that you spoke on that, and shout out to Girls Plus Environment doing big things, which I know, and I can't wait for us to tell the listeners more about at the end of this episode. But that's a big thing. So I'm glad that you are doing that and that you expanded on that. So another thing that I want to ask you about. So, Biden's administration also launched the American Climate Corps. So, what can you tell us about this program and the other positive implications that this has had for the economy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just put a disclaimer. I don't know a whole ton about the Climate Corps, but basically the Climate Corps is the climate or environmental version of AmeriCorps or of like Teach for America, all of those like really cool programs that so many people were able to benefit from. Like I know so many people who are part of like AmeriCorps or Teach for America. And so basically the Climate Corps is like helping youth, helping people to find entry level jobs into the climate sector. And so it's really cool because I think it provides trainings and all types of resources and things like that. But it's really just preparing and training the next generation of individuals to be a part of the climate sector and have good quality, high paying jobs in the space. And I think that's really important because there's so many myths around climate doesn't pay or like it's not a high paying job. There are tons of jobs within that space and good quality high paying jobs as well. And so being able to educate and prepare people, whether it's for trade jobs or in corporate spaces around the climate space, that program is going to be able to do that to make sure that individuals have the skill sets to really take on careers within the climate space. So I'm excited for that program, and we've done a lot of amplification around it as well.
So, what I want to ask you in terms of this program, I know we talked about at the beginning of our conversation when you first entered the sector, there wasn't a lot of diversity in terms of seeing a lot of Black and Brown people in this space. Based on your experience and what you're seeing, do you feel that this program could be an opportunity for more people that look like us to be able to have access to this space?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think that this will be a great opportunity for that because one of the things too is, it was back then I feel like it was also hard for people to get jobs within the climate space. A lot of the internships that I had when I was growing up, they were all non-paid opportunities. Like I remember driving an hour every day to Lansing, Michigan to work for an internship that was unpaid. And so yeah, it was ridiculous. Now, would I advise that in today's world? No,
Yeah.
but I did it, and I think that the Climate Corps allows people to be able to get those opportunities without having to make those sacrifices, to be able to get paid for the work that you're doing, and to be able to just get that experience within the sector. I think is really important to really build up your resume. So this will definitely be something to kind of help diversify the sector and to get more Black and Brown people into this work. So I'm excited about it and to just kind of see what the impacts are going to be as well.
Listen, I was excited prepping for this episode, but I knew talking to you, like the more we go through these policies, I'm just more encouraged. I'm
I
more
love
encouraged.
that.
So my next question for you. Another significant executive order was signed by President Biden in April of 2023. And this actually directed every federal agency to work toward, in quotes, environmental justice for all. One example of this is the Justice 40 initiative, which aims to deliver at least 40% of the benefits from climate, clean energy, and clean water investments to disadvantaged communities. Another initiative with environmental focus, but also tied to diversity and equity, includes the America the Beautiful initiative. And how this initiative ties to diversity and equity is because this initiative was meant to serve as a strategic response to the climate crisis by conserving more than 26 million acres of public land, which include tribal lands. What else should listeners understand about these initiatives and their connection and the importance of adding to, nurturing diversity and equity, if I'm saying that in the right way?
Yeah. And I'll start off with the Justice 40 initiative because I'm more familiar with that one.
Mhm.
So J40 was amazing. Ironically, my organization, Girl Plus Environment, is a Justice 40 organization. We were selected last year around this time to be one of the recipients of the grants, of the trainings, opportunities for that program. And so basically there were a ton of, let me see, this is probably their third cohort where we received funding from Justice 40. We received technical assistance, help with grant writing, really everything. And it was for smaller community-based organizations. And I believe most of those organizations are also ran by people of color, which makes it even greater. And so that accelerator was basically created to help smaller environmental justice organizations like mine to get access to federal funding, which is something, and I don't know if anyone has applied to a federal grant before, but it is the hardest thing on life. There are so many barriers to entry, to even getting an application in. It takes a lot of resources and capacity. So most smaller environmental organizations that are actually helping people on the ground can't even get past the application process. And so getting access to be a part of the Justice 40 Accelerator has been significant so that we can have those opportunities. We were able to bring on a grant writer to help us apply to so many grants. We got our first 3-year, multi-year, 6-figure grant this past year because of that. And so it's really huge to be a part of the Justice 40 Accelerator program. But one thing that I will flag is that, in the language, it's very strategic because the Justice 40 says that, I don't know specifically, but you had just said it, basically the word benefits, that communities of color benefits from these issues. But it doesn't say that communities of color get that funding. It just means that we need to benefit, like 40% of our communities should benefit from the funding. And so that's something that a lot of our organizations are struggling with and a bit unhappy about, because it shouldn't be that we should just benefit from these policies or from the funding. It should be that the funding should go to us as well so that we can distribute it out to communities. So it's really important in policies for us to really understand the fine lines of what exactly is being said, because yes, we appreciate to be benefited from it, but it also sucks when a lot of people who have more resources, a lot of white leg big organizations are able to get funding where we're not, because we don't have the resources to do so. So that is a great program, but of course it's not 100% perfect. But the other program, the America the Beautiful, that one is great as well, because when we talk about land ownership and how much value it is, especially for our communities and our people. And I just read, what was the name of that book by Hannah Nicole? I can't remember right off the top of my head, but what was that?
You can email it to me and then I'll link
Okay.
it for the listeners in the
Okay. Thank
the
you. I don't know
episode
why I
bio.
can't remember it now. I'm like, I think I
Yeah.
have the book somewhere. It's okay. But she talks about land ownership and the fact about like Black farmers, and the fact that many of our lands were taken from us, and
Mhm.
how that just really coincides with our ability to live in these very sustainable and eat off the land, and not have to depend so much on government and all this assistance. And so for us to be able to have access to our land and be able to buy our land back, or to just get our land back, I think is huge, from all different aspects. So I'm excited to actually dig a little bit more into that policy as well, because I'll admit I haven't looked a whole lot into it too.
So you just said a mouthful, and I appreciate you expanding on that. And I could see how excited you were talking about the Justice 40 initiative. And so I have a few questions about that. So in terms of getting federal grants, did I say the right
Yep.
terminology?
Hmm.
Okay. Can you explain and just expand on some of the barriers of entry? Because I think that's something that I'm not aware of, because I don't, at some point, I desire to have a nonprofit. I don't have it yet. But I do want to have that understanding, and then just have our listeners understand the challenges that exist for Black people that look like us, that are trying to advance the organization and are doing the very grassroots organization in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we may have to do a whole separate episode on nonprofits, because that's a whole other thing.
We can
But
definitely do it, but
yeah.
pop your stuff. This is your space, so
Yes, yes.
educate the people.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing with federal grants, the reason that there's so many barriers is honestly the time that it takes to apply. So basically, you'll see someone put an advertisement out for a federal grant. For example, there's the EPA Community Change Grant that we've been working on with a few other partners. I would say I started working on that grant in January, and it is now October. And so it takes a lot of time. You have to have tons of supplemental documents. You can't just put together your own narrative. You have to include so many things. I mean, even we call it the NOFO, but it stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity. That document alone, I want to say, it was like almost 100 pages worth of things you have to review and make sure that you include all different components. You have to do analysis, you have to do research, you have to have all of these specific partners, you have to show that you have good relationships with those partners. There are just a lot of things that you have to have together to even submit the grant. Mind you, is it a lot of money? Yes. I think there's grants for over $2 million for some of these grants, which is very exciting. But it just takes a long time to do it, and it kind of hurts because I just spent like all these months applying for this grant, but I didn't get it. So it's a huge gamble of even if you feel like it's worth your capacity and time to even apply if you don't know that you'll get it or not, especially if you have not received large scale grants in the past. So it's just it's just a huge capacity. You also have to go through a platform called grants.gov. And I swear it must have been like a year that I went through back and forth with technical assistance to try to get that website to work for me, because it was not working. It was like phone calls being put on hold to try to figure out if the platform will work. So yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers when applying to federal grants. But when you do get them, it's great, right? You get tons tons of funding, and it looks really good for your organization to be a part of that as well.
The second piece to my question, thank you for explaining that. And I'm sorry that the process goes so long. It sounds very similar. So I was a marketing coordinator for an engineering firm for a couple of years. And it sounds like the process, what we used to do for like RFPs, RFQs, again, not even aligning the aggravation that I can hear you expressing with that. But when you talked about the amount of documentation that's necessary and the length of time, that's the only thing my experience can correlate it to at this point, which I didn't even realize that it was that lengthy of a process for you to have started that in January and it's October. That is insane. Like, I get we're talking about $2 million, but come on, like.
Yeah, it's a lot, especially for if you're a four-person team. You have your own programs and projects that you still have to do, and you have other grants that you have applied for too, because you don't know if you're going to get this one. So it's definitely a lot.
I can imagine, which brings me to my next question. One of the other things that you brought up in terms of the Justice 40 initiative is the language. So talk to us about the language with a lot of these initiatives that say they may say one thing like, oh, to benefit disadvantaged communities.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little sticky in terms of what that language means. So currently, with these policies, are you feeling optimistic in terms of there being a solution on the horizon where it's not as sticky and it actually means one thing in the documentation? Or do you feel that we're a long way from that?
Um, I mean, I think that we're close, right? And I don't know the reasoning I for a certain language in different policies. I imagine it's because they're trying to walk on eggshells, and they want the policy passed. I mean, it was already hard enough to get the IRA passed in the first place. And so I think that they try not to push buttons too much on the federal policy side, because when they do, then they're going to shut it down and it not get passed through. But at the same time, I think this speaks values to the impact and the need for other organizations or other entities to step in to make it so that, for example, if the policy says that, oh, we're going to make sure that this percentage of communities benefit from the program, that's
Mhm.
when other organizations step in to make sure that they don't only benefit, but they also get the funding. So I think that's how government and nonprofits work together. For example, there's a great nonprofit here in Georgia called Partnership for Southern Equity. There's also a group called the Solutions Project, and they were basically the people or the organizations that really put together the Justice 40 Accelerator. And so that's what my organization is a part of. And so that's how we're able to get funding through Justice 40. And so I think it just goes to show the importance of working hand with government plus nonprofits, community organizations to make sure that we can kind of get around these little, I guess, like loopholes within the policies.
Okay. I appreciate you expanding on that, because I didn't want to skirt past that, because I feel like that was important in terms of, we have these policies,
Yes.
but you know.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So something else that I wanted to mention, that has recently taken place. So, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on. So, prior to Hurricane Helene hitting Florida, Congress voted on a short-term spending bill that included funds for disaster relief. The bill did pass, but there were actually 100 members of Congress that voted against the bill, three of which represent the state of Florida and are on the Republican side. So, why do you feel, in your experience having been in this sector, when bills like this are placed on the floor, why do you feel that they took the position of voting against the bill, especially being in these communities?
Yeah, and I saw a post on Impact that like posted the photos of all the people
Mhm.
who voted against it. I was like, oh, these people. I was like, I should have reposted it.
I think we liked the same post. I saw that. Yeah, yeah,
Probably,
yeah.
yeah, probably. I was like, oh my goodness. Not 100% surprised, but
Yep.
it's a bit disheartening and a bit weird, honestly, especially given where they're located, the three individuals. But honestly, I've been seeing a lot of like controversy around people thinking that Hurricane Helene or Hurricane Milton was like on purpose, or that I don't know how that could have been. Maybe they know something we don't know, but I think there are just a lot of people in climate denial stage, which is really difficult because we have so much work to do and we are still very much far behind. But yeah, I mean, as to why they would be voting against it, I really think it has to do with pride and just being in denial, honestly. I mean, unfortunately, the US is one of those countries where we are very reactive as opposed to proactive. And so we don't really feel like we have to react to climate disasters or climate things or just
Mhm.
a lot of things in general until it's too late. And so it's very unfortunate, but unfortunately that makes it so that we're put in a very bad position. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't have like a better answer as to why these individuals would be voting against um against the relief, but it's just yeah, it's really wild to me, honestly. It really is. Yeah.
No, I think that was a perfect answer. I was thinking the same thing. I just was wondering if, if you had any other insight being in the sector. But no, I
Yeah.
definitely I agree with that. I agree with
Yeah.
pride, being in denial, selfishness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I'm usually one of those people. I do a great job at seeing both sides of the story, both ends, but honestly, I just cannot I can't find one for this situation because it just makes absolutely no sense at all. I don't know how much more worse it has to get for people to get in line, but at one point there may get to a point where it's just too late. So we'll see.
Yeah, we definitely will see. So with that being said, I wanted to ask you, we touched on this at the beginning of our conversation, and I feel like because we are towards the end, this is a perfect time to ask. So what I want to ask you is, at this stage in the game, do you feel, based on your expertise and just having skin in the game, do you feel that anything can be done to either, if not completely reverse, just prevent the environmental damage that has been done from worsening the impact on climate change?
Yes, my answer to that is absolutely yes. I would be a bad climate policy person if I said no. And if I said no, I would be lying. In the climate or environmental space, we use a term called climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And so mitigation is just as the word is, finding ways to mitigate the impact that climate change is going to have on our communities. And so that is doing different things like I guess some people would say like recycling or using less energy or using electric vehicles, really all of the, I guess, environmental things that we think about doing as individuals to save the planet or save the environment. But the other term of climate adaptation, that really helps us to think about how do we as humans exist in this world as it is getting hotter. So how do we adapt as people, as humans, whether or not we're get our bodies used to living in warmer temperatures or whether we redesign our streets in our communities to be prepared for excessive flooding or for hurricanes because we know that at the rate we've been going, those are going to happen more often. So those are kind of the two ways that we look at it. But yeah, to answer your question, there definitely are things that can and should be done. A lot of my work is on the side of making sure that we as individuals and as community members are holding those in power and who have the decisions accountable to making those things happen. And it doesn't mean that the little individual things that we do on the ground doesn't work. It definitely does, and we should continue to do that, but that's only one piece of the pie, right? We have to be engaged on a political level, on a community and an institutional level, especially when it comes to voting in individuals that will make sure that we are taking the right steps to live in an environment that may be impacted by climate. And so, yeah, really taking a stance on the policy side of things and making sure that we're holding people accountable, I would say are critical pieces of us being able to, I guess, slow down the impacts of climate change.
I think that's a great explanation. I feel encouraged hearing you say that. So I want to ask you, what else, is there anything that we haven't covered that listeners should take into consideration as they prepare to cast their ballot in November? And this can be someone who may be undecided or maybe just hasn't even considered environmental policies and the implication in other areas in terms of equity, economics, all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, and this is one of my favorite things to say, environmental policy is not about the environment. It's about the people that are in it. It's about specifically our communities that are most impacted by the environment. So when we say or when we think like, oh, these issues don't really matter to me, or I have more pressing things like being able to get to work or just staying alive every day. You know, there's so many issues happening in our communities, but if you really think about it, our environments are related and intertwined into all the social, economic, and racial justice issues that we experience in our communities every single day. So, your ability to get to work when you're waiting outside by the bus stop, being able to be there without suffering from heat strokes, you know, all those things are all closely related. And so, when you go to cast your ballot, make sure that you actually do look into the individuals, especially on the local level. Local elections also matter just as much as they do for presidential and federal elections. And look at the different things that the individuals, the candidates have voted for or voted against. You know, ask them what their stances are as it relates to environmental justice, and ask them what environmental justice means to them. Are they talking about the people in the community and the issues that we're experiencing? Are they talking about and advocating for the health and well-being of our communities? Do they think about whether or not we have access to parks and healthy foods nearby? Are we able to walk down the street? You know, so many different things that I think we kind of take for granted and don't think about as being a part of our environments are absolutely a part of our environments and have everything to do with the individuals that we vote for. So yeah, I would just ask that people really take the time to look into that as much as they look into everything else. As much as you look into what you're going to wear for that day or how you want to style your hair the next day, these things are just as important, if not more.
You know, this is on my spirit to share with you, and this wasn't a part of the questions, but I was getting my car serviced Friday afternoon, and I was taking an exam on my laptop, but I overheard some of the conversation from two older ladies who were in the dealership as well. And one of them was saying, now don't quote me on this because I wasn't even educated on this, because I'm I don't I'm not there at this season in my life yet. But what I overheard her saying, she was talking about her Medicare benefits, and how she was like, yeah, I got this letter, and she was like, you know, and they're thinking about this and thinking about that, and she was like, and girl, I'm scared, you know, if Trump gets in the office, he's trying to do this and take this away. And I, because I'm not in that season of life, obviously, like, I would listen to that, but I have not done my research specifically on that. My focus has been on reproductive rights and topics such as this. These are areas of interest for me. The reason I'm bringing this up is because when you said, when you mentioned people focusing on the issue that is in front of them, but they may not feel like it directly affects them. So I want to encourage our listeners, don't just vote for yourself in November, because just because an issue may not directly affect you this second, this week, doesn't mean that, one, it won't at some point, and two, we can't afford as a society to have a laissez-faire attitude about how something affects someone else. So I just want to encourage everyone to think about that, just to go based off of what you shared. So that's all. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So I want to give you, I always like to ask my guests one style related question, because it is the Style and Conversation podcast. And because we're talking about all things environment, my question for you is, how do you find ways to express your personal style and explore with fashion while also being practicing sustainability?
Yeah, this is a good question. I thought a little bit about it. I feel like, well, one, I think I'm still trying to find out my style. We might have to talk online offline about that.
You look great.
But
Y'all, I just want to say Diamond just got married and she was an absolutely stunning bride.
thank
Like,
you. Oh my gosh, that means so
so
much. Thank
beautiful.
you. So for me, I think as far as style, and I mean, I've kind of always been this type of person. I'm not really a shopper, honestly. I usually just like wear whatever I have at my home. I don't feel the need to buy a new outfit every time I need to go somewhere.
That part.
But I will say I don't think that that has anything to do with like my sustainability or environmental lens. I think that that's just kind of how I've always been.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of gets to the argument of a lot of us are actually sustainable and environmental people. We just don't even realize it, you know? We don't realize it. And I think a lot of my decisions for just kind of like wearing what I have at home is more so from the economic standpoint. And that just really goes back to my other point of economics and sustainability is so closely related. You know, why go buy something new when you already have something or you can switch something up? Same as
Yeah.
water bottles. Why get a whole case of water bottle? We can just have one reusable water bottle and a filter, you know? So I would, yeah, that's really where my style kind of goes into play. But at the same time, I want to emphasize like at GPE, we're really big on like not shaming people if like what you can afford is Shein or whatever it is, that's what you can afford. If you need to shop at Amazon, you know, all those things, we are very cognizant of not shaming people and pushing them away from the sector. We want to do the opposite. We, of course, want to show people about different opportunities and other more sustainable brands. But we also know that, hey, times are hard out here. So sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But if anything, we should be holding those in power accountable to even producing those products in the first place. And so again, that goes to back to the policy side of things of we got to act on a policy level just as much as we do things on an individual level.
I love that. I love that you explained it in that way. And then also the approach is not shaming, but meeting people where they're at. And let's hold the people at the top accountable because that's
Yes,
what we need to be doing.
absolutely.
So I want to close it out by giving you the opportunity to spotlight your amazing organization. Tell us all about Girl Plus Environment, where we can keep up with you all, how we can support you. If you all have any upcoming projects, if you have any upcoming speaking engagements, just because you're doing all the things, anything that we can support you on, this is your moment. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, again, Girl Plus Environment, we are a national nonprofit that's most of our staff is based here in Georgia, but we do work in communities all across the US. But basically created to empower more women of color to stand up for all aspects of climate and environmental justice in their neighborhoods, in their communities. So helping to provide tools, resources, mentorship, really everything under the sun to help communities of color be able to advocate for the health and well-being of themselves and the people in their community. So we do tons of different work, whether it's around educating hairdressers about toxic chemicals found in our hair products. We do tons of work here in the city of Atlanta to educate people about clean energy and there are very high energy bills to help us get engaged in lowering our energy rates. We do work around, we just got funding to do mental health healing circles for people who have just recently gone through traumatic natural disasters like hurricanes. And so we'll be kicking that off very soon and tons of other projects. But feel free to follow us at Girl Plus Environment on all of our social media platforms. You can also go onto our website, girlplusenvironment.org. But if you like to keep up with me personally, feel free to also go on my personal website, diamondspratling.com, or also reach out to me on social media. My social media or my Instagram is at Diamond Sierra. And yeah, I mean, tons of speaking engagements coming up. I'm kind of taking a break. I've been giving talks these past couple months back to back. So taking a little break into the new year. But I do have my very first children's book will be coming out next month, actually, which I'm very excited for. It's called Sage Sells the World, a little girl's journey to Antarctica. And basically, the basis of the story is a young girl named Sage, a Black girl. She basically is traveling all across the world to all of these different countries that her grandmother told her about when her grandmother was young and traveled the world. And what happens is when she goes to these different parts of the world, they don't look the same way. They look different. Antarctica is now warm. The trees that she saw in Brazil are gone because of deforestation and all these things. And so the little girl kind of learns about how climate change has played a factor into these communities and into different parts of the world. And she basically takes her little dog Benji, and they go to travel the world to kind of fix and help kind of save the planet. So yeah, look out for that. I'll share the link to pre-sales and all of that, but super excited, and thank you again for having me.
Well, I can't wait until your book is released. Congratulations ahead of time, because that's amazing. You're already doing all these things, and now you can add, in the words of Maya Wilkes, now you can add authoress to your resume as well. So I'm so proud of you, and I am so grateful that you came into the space to educate us on policies that we may not have even realized had an impact on us day to day, and give us some optimism for the future of our environment. And just thank you for all the work that you all are doing. And I just can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate that. And yeah, appreciate for having me on this show. I'm super excited for the final clip. And yeah, I'm just glad that we were able to meet back in March, and now we're here. So looking
Now
forward
we're here.
to
We talked about it at the event, and it came full circle.
Manifestation. Yes.
Yes, that's it. That is really it. Well, I can't wait for the listeners to hear this episode and see what you do next. And with that, Style Crew, we are out until another episode. Hey, Style Crew, make sure you're keeping up with our podcast through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, as well as the Podcast Index. And if you'd like to view the podcast visually, check out my YouTube channel, Styled by Jessica Lauren. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at style_and conversation podcast.